My name is Pauline Conrad, and I was 25 the night my family decided I no longer counted. It happened over dinner. White tablecloth. My father set down his fork and called my plan a fool's errand. He said a Conrad does not dig in the dirt. My mother folded her napkin and agreed. My sister Caroline smiled across the table and said, "Enjoy your dirt farm, loser." I put down my fork, said one quiet thing, and walked out. What none of them knew was that my grandfather had already made a decision of his own. 10 years later, those same people would stand in a room I built, holding a glass they couldn't ignore. And what they were about to hear would take the words right out of their mouths. Before I take you back, if this is already sitting heavy in your chest, take a second to like and subscribe. And drop your city and your local time in the comments. I read every one, and I like knowing who's listening tonight. This is the story of the family that threw me away over a patch of dirt, and what my grandfather had quietly done about it long before I knew. Let's go back 10 years, to a hillside in Sonoma County. The Conrads were a law family. That's how my father introduced us at parties. "We're a law family," he'd say, like it was a bloodline and not a choice. My grandfather was the exception to it. My father never forgave him for that. We grew up in a tall house in town with a dining room that always smelled like furniture polish. There was a wall in the front hallway. On that wall, my father hung the framed degrees. His, my mother's, Caroline's, once she made the partner track. At the end of the row there was an empty space, and everyone in the family understood that the space was mine. I was supposed to fill it. "We don't do trades, Pauline," my mother told me once when I said I liked working with my hands. "We do law." I learned early what kind of daughter the family wanted. At Caroline's law school graduation, there was a party at the house. My father gave a toast about the Conrads standing in court. He named Caroline. He named himself. He named a great-uncle who'd been a judge. He did not name me, and I was 19 and standing right there with a tray of glasses, and I understood I was meant to carry the tray. I was good at school the way a tired person is good at holding their breath. I got into law school. I made it through the first year. By the second, I was surviving on weekends. The weekends I drove 90 minutes north, out of the city and into the hills, to my grandfather's vineyard. He put me to work the minute I got out of the car. No hello. Just a pair of gloves, 3 sizes too big, and a row that needed tending. "You read the soil better than those books read you," he said to me once, watching me crumble a handful of dirt to feel the moisture in it. I laughed. He didn't. He meant it. The family called the place the dirt farm. They weren't entirely wrong about how it looked. 60 acres on a dry hillside in Dry Creek Valley, and at the center of it, 12 acres of old vines, head-trained, dry-farmed, planted before the war, gnarled like fists coming out of the ground. No irrigation, no neat trellises. Just old wood and dust, and a view that nobody in my family had ever stopped long enough to see. My father grew up on that hillside. He left it the way you leave something you're ashamed of. He went to law school, married my mother, and never came back except on holidays. And even then, only to remind my grandfather how far he had risen above the rows. One Thanksgiving, I came to the table with my hands still rough from a weekend of harvest, a blister healing on my palm. My father took my hand to look at it, in front of everyone, and turned it over like evidence. "This is what he's turning you into," he said to my mother, not to me. Caroline laughed into her wine. My grandfather kept an old pruning knife in his back pocket. Bone handle, worn smooth as a river stone. He used it like a 6th finger. "Someone's got to keep this when I'm gone," he said one evening, folding the blade shut. He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't have to. That spring, the cough I would learn to dread was already there, small, at the edges of him. He waved it off. But the man who had never once sat down in the rows started carrying a folding chair out among the vines. I made my decision in April. I wasn't going back for my 3rd year. I was going to learn to make wine from the only person who had ever looked at me and seen something other than an empty space on a wall. I told my parents at dinner, "You already know how that went. What you don't know is the part before the part you saw." Before my father called it a fool's errand, before Caroline smiled, he set his glass down very carefully and said the quiet version first. "You walk out that door," he said. "You walk out of this family." On my way out, I stopped at the wall of degrees, at the empty space that was supposed to be mine. I said the one quiet thing, "Leave it empty." Then I left. The first thing he taught me was how to stand in a row, not how to prune, how to stand. Feet apart, weight down, looking at one vine until I stopped seeing a whole hillside and started seeing a single living thing that needed me. We worked from the cool end of the morning into the heat. He handed me the bone-handled knife and watched my cuts. If I went wrong, he didn't scold. He put his hand over mine and showed me the angle. "The ground keeps its own books," he'd say, tamping soil back around a root. "Everything you put in, it remembers. Everything you take out, it writes down." I lived in the small house at the edge of the property that summer. I learned the names of the blocks, the way the fog sat in the low corner past noon, the sound the old vines made when the wind came through them at night, dry, like someone turning pages. One evening, he led me into the oldest block, pulled a cluster from a vine older than both of us, and told me to eat. The skins were thick, the seeds were brown. He watched my face change. "That," he said, "remember that." He told me his father had planted that block, bare root by hand in 1936, on a hillside everyone in the county said was too dry to bother with. They called him a fool too, my grandfather said, and there was something close to a smile in it. He just kept planting. There was a night that April that I think about more than any other. A frost warning came in late, the kind that can kill a year's growth in a few hours. He woke me at 2 a.m, pounding on the door of the small house. We ran wind machines, lit smudge pots between the old vines, walked the rows in the dark with our breath hanging in the air. We worked until the sun came up, and the danger broke. We stood at the top of the hill afterward, filthy, frozen, watching the light come over the vines we'd saved. "My son never once got out of bed for this," my grandfather said. He wasn't bitter about it. He said it the way you'd note the weather. "You did?" First time I asked. In August, he told me to clean up. "I need to show you something in town." He drove us to a low brick building with a brass plate by the door. "Bishop, estate law." He went in. I waited in the hall on a bench that was too hard, flipping through a magazine I didn't read. When he came out, a woman walked him to the door. Gray suit, steady eyes. She shook his hand like they had known each other a long time. He patted my shoulder. "It's done," he said. "Don't worry about it yet." I didn't. I was 25, and I thought we had years. A week later, the same woman came to the vineyard with a small camera on a tripod. My grandfather put on his good shirt under the faded canvas work coat he wore every day, the one the color of dust. He sat at the kitchen table. The woman framed the shot. A little red light came on. He waved me out of the room gently. "Go check the fermenters." I went. Through the window, I watched him talk to the lens, slow and deliberate, the way he did everything. I couldn't hear the words. When they finished, the red light went off, and he came outside tired in a way I hadn't seen before. "What was that?" I asked. He almost smiled. "Insurance." The cough got worse through September. He waved it off the way he waved off everything that tried to slow him down. He still walked the rows at dawn. He still carried the knife. But the folding chair came out earlier each morning, and some days he sat in it longer than he worked. "Vines outlive everybody," he told me from that chair, looking down the old block. "That's the point. You don't own them. You keep them for the next set of hands." There was a last good day. We picked a single bin from the old block. Just the two of us. Crushed it in a small tub, and he tasted the juice off his thumb and nodded once. satisfied, like a man closing a ledger. He went to bed early that night. One morning in October, he didn't come out to the Rose. I found the folding chair where he had left it, the canvas seat still holding the shape of him. He was gone by the end of the week. The funeral was small until my family arrived. They came late, in dark clothes that cost more than my truck. My father stood at the back and let his eyes move over the hillside, the vines, the barn, the equipment, the way he read a balance sheet. My mother dabbed at nothing. Nobody from the family came to stand with me at the front. Earl did. Earl, who had worked beside my grandfather for 30 years, stood at my shoulder in a borrowed jacket and didn't say a word, which was exactly the right thing to say. Caroline looked out at the rose, the same rose that had grown the only peace I had ever known, and said, to no one in particular, "Well, somebody has to deal with all this." I didn't answer her. I had stopped answering them in the spring. They left before the last of the folding chairs were stacked. No one hugged me. My mother touched my arm on the way to the cars and said we'd talk soon. We didn't. I think we both knew we wouldn't. The cars went down the gravel, and the dust hung in the air a while, and then it settled. The way dust does. 3 weeks later, the woman from the brick building called me in. Nora Bishop. She slid a folder across the desk. My grandfather, she explained, had placed the vineyard into an irrevocable trust. The 60 acres, the old block, the house, the name on the gate. Mine. Done and finished while he was alive, with her sitting beside him and a doctor's letter in the file confirming he knew exactly what he was doing. There was more. A letter, sealed in his handwriting, and a recording. "He made it for the day you'd need it," Nora said. "Not before." I asked her what was on it. She said it wasn't time. I didn't push. I was too numb to push. I took the letter home. I did not open it. I hung my grandfather's dust-colored coat behind the door of the small house, and I set the sealed envelope on the table beneath it, and for a long time I left both of them exactly where they were. The family had a name for the place. I made it the name on the bottle. Folly. That's what they'd always called it among themselves, behind my grandfather's back. Walt's Folly. The old man playing in the dirt. So when I registered the winery, I wrote it on the form without blinking. Folly Vineyards. Earl laughed when he heard. He'd have liked the joke, he said. The first label, I printed myself. The first vintage, I made with equipment older than I was, and a bank balance that dropped a little every week. The second year almost ended it. The press cracked during crush. Right in the middle of bringing in the old block, the old basket press split a seam, and I stood there in the dark with fruit coming in faster than I could handle it and no money for the part. I called every equipment yard within 100 miles. None had it. Finally, a grower 2 valleys over, a man who had known my grandfather, told me to come take his spare. I drove it back on a borrowed flatbed at midnight, strapped down with rope, praying the whole way it wouldn't shift. I finished the pick on no sleep. Then a heat spike came through that same week, and I lost part of a younger block before I could get to it. The invoices on the kitchen table started coming in red. I priced out selling the old tractor. I priced out selling my grandfather's truck. One night, I sat at that table with my phone in my hand and my father's number on the screen. I want to tell you, I didn't think about calling. I thought about it for a long time. I imagined the conversation. I imagined him picking up, and the careful pause, and the price he would make me pay for the asking. I put the phone down. Instead, I took the sealed letter off the table, and for the first time, I opened it. I read one line. Just one. Then I folded it back up and put it under the coat again. That one line got me through the winter. I'll tell you what it was later, when it matters. That spring, I made a barrel that tasted like his. I didn't have words for it. It just had the thing his wines always had, the dust and the dark fruit and the long finish. And I stood in the cellar with the thief in my hand, and I had nobody to hand the glass to. That was the first time the grief really landed. Not at the funeral. In the cellar. With a wine he would have understood. That winter I pruned the old block alone for the first time. 12 acres of head-trained vines, each one a decision, each cut shaping what the vine could carry come spring. I heard him in my hands the whole time. Leave 4 spurs, not 5, cut to an outward bud. Don't be greedy with an old vine, it gives what it gives. By the end, my hands had cramped into the shape of the shears, and I'd talked to him out loud for 3 days straight. Nobody heard me. The vines did, I think. The ground keeps its books. The old block kept doing something. A sommelier drove up from the city on a tip and asked to taste through the lineup. She was the kind of person who spits and frowns and writes nothing down. When she got to the old vine reserve, she went quiet. She tasted it twice. She set the glass down and looked at me. "Where has this been?" she said. She ordered 6 cases on the spot. A small list in San Francisco put it by the glass. Then a restaurant in Healdsburg called and asked for an allocation, like I was the kind of winery that had allocations. Earl worked that whole next season without taking a check. He didn't make a thing of it. He just showed up at dawn the way he always had, fixed what broke, taught me what I didn't know. "Old vines don't quit," he said, when I tried to thank him. "Neither do you." From my family, there was nothing. No call, no card. Not when the first vintage shipped. Not when my grandfather's name started showing up in print next to mine. Once, in town, a man who'd known my father stopped me at the hardware store and said he'd seen the family at a charity dinner, that Caroline had spoken beautifully, that they all seemed so proud of her. He asked if I ever saw them. I said no. He looked down at my hands and didn't ask again. I told myself the silence was peace. I told myself we were done with each other cleanly, and that was the best I could hope for. Then a thick envelope arrived. Heavy paper, my full name typed across the front. It did not feel like a card. It wasn't a card. I opened it at the kitchen table. It was a lawsuit. My family was suing to undo my grandfather's transfer of the vineyard. The claim was that he had lacked the capacity to make it. That he had been confused, influenced, that the old man who had taught me to read soil with my hands had not been in his right mind when he gave the land to the granddaughter who loved it. They wanted the transfer voided. They wanted the vineyard pulled back into his estate. And his estate, under the will they were waving around, went to his son, my father. I read the words "lack of capacity" 3 times. The kitchen got very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside a coyote called, and the dogs 2 properties over answered it. Then I read the line that stopped me cold. The plaintiffs were Charles and Adele Conrad, my parents. I put the pages down, lined the edges up square, then picked them up and read the caption again, because some part of me needed to see the names a second time to believe a court would let them print it. The blister scar on my palm had healed flat years ago. I pressed my thumb into it anyway. An old habit. The way you check that a thing is real. I sat at the table for a long time. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my sister. Caroline picked up on the 4th ring. There was noise behind her. A restaurant. People laughing. "Caroline, there's a lawsuit. You know about this?" A pause. The noise got quieter, like she'd stepped away. "I really can't talk about Mom and Dad's legal matters. It's Grandpa's vineyard. They're saying he was senile." "I'm sure it'll get worked out," she said, in the voice you use on a stranger. "I have to go." She hung up. I held the phone and listened to the dead line, and I understood that the white tablecloth had never really ended. It had just gone quiet for a while. Then it had picked the most expensive possible moment to start talking again. In the morning, I found Earl in the cellar and told him. He listened, topping a barrel, not turning around. When I finished, he set the bung down very carefully. "Your granddad knew his own mind better than any man I ever met," Earl said. His voice had something in it I'd never heard from him. "You fight this." "I'm going to." "Good." He picked the bung back up. He'd want you to use your head, not your fists. He always said the dirt doesn't shout. I drove to Nora Bishop's office that afternoon. I had not slept. I put the papers on her desk and asked her how bad it was. She read for a minute. She didn't look worried, which steadied me more than anything she could have said. Your grandfather planned for this, she said. How could he plan for this? Because he knew them. She tapped the folder. Capacity is judged at the moment of the transfer. We have a doctor's letter from that week. We have my notes. We had independent counsel, which was me, advising him alone, without you in the room. And we have the recording. He built this thing to hold weather. They can't win on the documents, so they won't try to. They'll keep filing instead, year after year, until you're too tired and too broke to hold the hill. What's on the recording? What you'd expect from him. She closed the folder. We hold it. Not yet. You don't spend a thing like that early. You spend it once, where it counts. Then she told me what defending it would cost. Not the verdict. The road to it. Years, maybe. Money I didn't have, pulled out of a business that barely had it. The first invoice from her own office came a month later. I paid it out of what I'd set aside for new barrels, and I aged the next vintage in old ones, and I didn't complain. I asked her the question I already knew the answer to. Why now? Why, after years of silence, would they come for a hillside they had called a dirt farm? Nora slid a single sheet toward me. A preliminary valuation, ordered for the litigation. I looked at the number at the bottom. The dirt farm was not a dirt farm anymore. I sat with that. The contempt I could survive. The contempt I had survived for years. But the contempt had been free. And this was not free. This had a price tag now, and the price tag had made them remember they had a granddaughter to be rid of. I went back to the filing that night and read it the way Nora had taught me to read things. Slowly, all the way down. On the last page were the attorneys of record. Most of the names meant nothing to me. One did, P. Vance. I knew that name from somewhere. It took me until the next morning, standing in the kitchen with my coffee going cold, to place it. There was a photo I'd thrown in a drawer years ago, my sister's wedding. I dug it out and read the caption I'd written on the back in a different life. Caroline and Preston Vance. It wasn't only my parents in this. The lawyer driving it was my sister's husband. The lawsuit did not move fast. That, I came to understand, was the point. They put me through a deposition early on. A conference room downtown, a long table, a court reporter in the corner, Preston Vance across from me with a legal pad squared to the table edge. He was polite, which was worse than rude. For 3 hours he asked me questions designed to build a single picture, that I was a young woman who had isolated a sick old man and talked him out of his land. You lived alone with him, Preston said. On the property. I worked there, he taught me. And you were present when he met with his attorney. I waited in the hall. But you drove him there. He couldn't see well enough to drive at night anymore. Convenient, Preston said, and wrote something down. You make a lot of notes, I said. He didn't look up. It's what I do. I kept my voice flat for 3 hours. When it was over, I sat in my truck in the parking garage and shook. Not from fear. From the effort of holding still while a man I'd met twice at family events painted me as the thief in my own grandfather's life. A few weeks after the deposition, an offer came. Preston's firm proposed that I keep the small house and a few acres around it, sign the rest of the land and the name over to the estate, and walk away with a number that wasn't nothing. Make everyone whole, the letter said. Put it behind you. I read it twice and told Nora to decline it in one line. They didn't want a settlement. They wanted the hill, and they dressed it up as mercy. It went to trial after years of filings, and the court ruled for me. The judge found my grandfather had been competent, that the transfer was valid, that Nora's documentation was exactly what it appeared to be. I thought it was over. It was not over. They appealed. The appeal took the better part of 2 more years, and they lost that too. And when they lost the appeal, they came back with another motion, a different angle, a new way to keep the meter running. They're not trying to win. Nora told me, the day the latest filing landed. They can't win. They're trying to make you sell. Bleed you on fees until the only door left is to take their money and walk away from the hill. That was the cruelty of it. Every month the lawyers ate, I had less. Every month I spent fighting to keep the vineyard. The vineyard got harder to keep. The strategy wasn't a verdict. The strategy was exhaustion. So I stopped waiting to be exhausted. I told Nora I wanted to understand what they actually wanted. Not the legal theory. The real thing. Underneath. Discovery was already open. Nora had subpoenaed records connected to the land, the kind of thing you do to show a court the true value of what's in dispute. A batch of the other side's documents came back. Emails mostly, boxes of them. I read them at night, at the kitchen table under my grandfather's coat. It took weeks. Most of it was dull. Scheduling, strategy I half understood. Billing entries that made my stomach turn, line after line, hours and hours, all aimed at me. I'd read until the words swam and then make coffee and read more. One entry, dated the week of my grandfather's birthday, read, "Strategy call forcing sale." They'd billed it like any other task, 0.8 of an hour, on the week he would have turned 85. And then, in the middle of a thread from years back, I found one that wasn't dull at all. It was from my father. It was sent to a man named Stan Whitlock, a broker who sold vineyard land in the valley. It was dated long before the trial, back when the suit was new. My father was asking Whitlock a question. He was asking what the appreciated dirt would fetch on the open market, once they cleared the granddaughter. I read that line, "Once we clear the granddaughter," and I sat back from the table. I read it again. Then I called Nora, late, and read it to her out loud over the phone, and there was a silence on her end that told me she understood exactly what it was. "Send me the document number," she said quietly. "Don't lose that one." I had been the obstacle in a real estate transaction, not a daughter, not even an enemy, a title problem. It was never about whether my grandfather had been in his right mind. They knew he had been. The capacity claim was a tool. The real document was this one, and in this one there was no confusion at all. I kept reading. Preston's name was on everything, the strategy, the motions, the timing. He was the architect. And on 2 of the powers of attorney that let the machine run, there was a second signature, Caroline's. The smile from 10 years earlier, the one across the white tablecloth, the dirt farm, the loser. It had a different shape now. It had paperwork behind it. Nora laid out my options plainly. We had enough now to finish them in court, or to force a settlement so quiet the world would never know it happened. Clean, done, no scene. I sat with the letter in my hand, the one I still had not read past the first line. "I want to hear him first," I said. It was time to let my grandfather talk. "Before I tell you what was on that recording, stop for a second and guess. What does a man like my grandfather leave behind for the day he knows his own son will come for everything? Tell me what you think it was. Then I'll show you." I had waited years to watch it. Part of me was afraid of what his face would do to me. Part of me wanted to keep him alive in the not knowing, in the sealed envelope and the unplayed file, where he was still a thing I had coming. But the email had changed that. Now, I needed him. Nora told me the recording had been made the same week as the doctor's letter. Same days, same sound mind. Witnessed. "He didn't make it to comfort you," she said. "He made it to win. There's a difference. He'd want you to use it the way he meant it." Nora set it up in her conference room, drew the blinds, turned the screen toward me and left her hand on the remote. "You don't have to watch it with anyone," she said. "But you don't have to watch it alone either." "Stay," I said. The little red light came on the screen this time, in the corner of the frame. And there he was. The kitchen I knew. The good shirt under the dust-colored coat. His hands folded on the table, steady. He looked straight into the lens, the way he'd looked at a vine that needed work. He started by saying the date, clearly, and his full name, and that he was of sound mind and acting of his own free will, and that his attorney was in the room. He said it like a man laying fence posts, one, then the next, then the next. My doctor saw me this week, he said. Ask him. I know what day it is. I know what I own. I know who I'm giving it to. Then he looked a little past the camera, like he could already see the people who would one day be sitting where I was sitting. They'll say I wasn't myself, he said. My son will say it. He's good with words. I never was. So I'll keep this simple. Then he said the thing I had been waiting 10 years to hear, and I'm going to give it to you the way he gave it to me, without rushing it, because he didn't rush it either. I gave the land to Pauline because Pauline stayed, not because I wanted to punish anybody. I spent my whole life waiting for my son to walk back up that hill and put his hand in the dirt, and he never did. He waited for me to die so he could sell it. I know the difference between someone who loves a place and someone who's counting the days. The ground knows it too. The ground keeps its own books, and so do I. This land goes to the one who worked it, to the one who will keep it for the next set of hands, not to the ones who were waiting for me to be gone. He paused. He looked tired, the way he had after they shut the camera off that day. Pauline, he said softer, if you're watching this, then it happened the way I thought it would, and I'm sorry you had to find out for sure. Don't fight them angry. Anger gets tired. Fight them with the truth. The truth doesn't get tired, and neither do the old vines, and neither do you. The red light went off. I had not cried at the funeral. I had not cried through the lawsuit or the deposition or the boxes of billing. I cried then, with my hand flat against the screen, against the dust-colored coat, while Earl waited in the doorway with his hat in his hands because someone had told him I might need a ride home. He drove me back up the valley without talking, which was his gift, and only when we turned onto the gravel did he say anything at all. He talked to you the same in that thing as he did in the Rose, Earl said. Didn't he? Exactly the same. Then it's him. Earl put the truck in park. Use it right. That night I took out the letter and read the whole thing. He had written it in the same plain way he spoke. He wrote that he was proud of me, which he had never once said out loud. He wrote that the work would carry me when nothing else would. He wrote that my father had been a boy who hated getting dirty, who flinched from the rows, and that he'd loved him anyway and never managed to reach him, and that none of that was mine to carry. He wrote that I shouldn't hate him, because hate would cost me more than it would ever cost my father. He wrote that the vines would outlast all of it, the suit, the lawyers, his own name on the gate, and that my only job was to keep them for the next set of hands. And at the end, there was an instruction, almost an afterthought. If they ever come back, he wrote, don't slam the door. Let them stand on the ground once. Let the ground answer. I read it twice. I put it down. I decided I would not take their money, not any amount, not ever. I would wait for the right room instead. Then I knew exactly what I was going to do, and when I would do it, and who would be in the room. And the people who had spent 10 years coming for that hillside, they didn't know I had any of this. The news broke that summer, and it broke loud. One of the most feared palates in American wine put a number on my old vine reserve, 98 points. The write-up called what I was doing a revival, said the heritage vines my family had mocked were among the last of their kind in California, said my grandfather's name like it mattered. I read it 3 times standing in the kitchen. Earl read it over my shoulder, slow, moving his lips, and when he finished he took off his hat. He'd never say it out loud, Earl said, but he'd be insufferable about it for a month. Then the phone started ringing in a different way. An investment group flew out and sat at my kitchen table, 2 men in soft jackets who used the word portfolio a lot. They walked the old block in their nice shoes. One of them crouched, frowned at the wide spacing of the gnarled old vines and asked why the yields were so low. Dry farmed, head trained, I told him. That's the whole point. He nodded the way you nod at something you intend to fix. He started talking about grafting the old wood over to a higher-yielding clone, about running drip lines, about doubling production inside 3 years. He was describing the end of everything my grandfather had built, and he thought he was paying me a compliment. They talked about scale, about national distribution, about what they could do with the brand. Then they made an offer for the estate and the name. North of $40 million. For the dirt farm. They slid the term sheet across the same table where the red invoices used to sit. You'd never have to worry about money again, one of them said. I don't worry about money, I said. I worry about the vines. I told them no before they finished their coffee. The other one smiled like he thought I was negotiating. I let him keep thinking it on his way to the car. The term sheet went in the wood stove that night. A few days after the magazine hit, my phone lit up with a number I had spent a decade not answering. Home. It was my mother. Her voice had gone soft and warm, the voice she used on people she needed something from. Pauline, sweetheart, we've all let this go on too long, she said. Life is short. We're family. Let's put it behind us. I let the line breathe. Behind us, I repeated. Come to dinner, or we'll come to you. We'd love to see what you've built. Caroline called the next day. After 10 years of nothing, my sister wanted to come up and see the place. She told me she'd always known I had it in me. She used almost the same words my father had used to the writer later, which told me where the words had come from. I told Nora about the calls. She was quiet for a moment. The follow-on motion is about to be dismissed, she said. They've been told. They know they've lost. This isn't them softening. This is them reading the same article you did and the same ruling I did, and deciding the smart play is to be family again before the door closes for good. They want to be standing next to the 40 million, not across the table from it. I almost did what she expected me to do. I almost said no, kept the win quiet, and never saw any of them again. It was the clean choice. It was the safe choice. Then I thought about the letter. Let them stand on the ground once. Let the ground answer. When I told Nora my plan, she didn't love it. You're handing them a room full of your buyers, she said. If this goes wrong, they'll spin it. They're good at rooms. I told her I wasn't going to argue with them in a room. I was going to let my grandfather argue and let everyone watch. She was quiet for a while. Then she said she'd have the documents ready. I sent them an invitation, all of them, by name. Charles and Adele Conrad, Caroline and Preston Vance. Heavy paper, my full name on the return, an engraved invitation to the gala marking 10 years of Folly Vineyards and the release of the reserve. They accepted within the week. All 4, including the lawyer. I worked with Nora to set the room. The trust documents, organized in a folder. The court rulings, tabbed. The email from my father to Whitlock, printed clean on a single page. And in the barrel room, behind the small stage where I'd say a few words, a screen and the recording, cued and waiting. You're sure, Nora said the night before. Once it's in that room, you can't take it back. There's no settling it quietly after. He told me to let the ground answer, I said. I'm done settling things quietly. They thought they were coming to collect. They were walking onto the ground. We held the gala in the barrel room among the stacked oak on a night in November. Around 200 people came. Buyers, sommeliers, 2 writers, a row of distributors, growers from up and down the valley who had known my grandfather. Folly, the dirt farm, was lit up gold, and the reserve stood in a line of bottles down the center table, catching the light. Among them were people who had carried the wine when nobody knew the name, a distributor from the city, the sommelier from that first year, a few of the growers whose spare parts had saved my crushes. Earl wore a jacket I had never seen him in. He kept tugging the collar like it owed him money. An old grower came up to me early, a man with hands like roots who'd farmed across the road for 50 years. He took both my hands in his. "Walt would stand right there by that door," he said, nodding at it, "and watch the whole thing and pretend he hated it. I see him in you tonight." He squeezed once and let go. A young winemaker found me a few minutes later, a woman who'd driven up from the Central Coast. She told me she'd read about the old block and started training a heritage parcel of her own the dry way because of it. "People kept telling me to rip it out," she said. "Your story is the reason I didn't. I told her to come back at harvest and I'd put her in the rows. She wasn't a buyer. She was the next set of hands and she'd come on her own." Then the doors opened and my family walked in. My father came first, the way he always entered a room, and his eyes did the thing they did at the funeral. They moved over the oak, the crowd, the bottles, pricing it. My mother smiled at everyone. Behind them, Caroline and Preston hung back near the door. Caroline took a glass of the reserve off a passing tray. She looked around the room, at the lights and the stacked barrels and the people in good clothes, and she said it loud enough for the people near her to hear. "So this is the dirt farm." She held the glass the whole night. I never once saw her drink from it. A buyer standing near her caught the contempt in it, glanced at the gold light and the full room, and turned his shoulder a few degrees away from her. Small things. The room was already reading them. My father found a writer almost immediately. I watched him do it from across the room, a hand on the man's shoulder, the easy voice. By the time I crossed to them, he was in the middle of a story. "The Conrad family estate," he was saying. "4 generations on this land. My grandfather planted those old vines with his own hands. We always believed in Pauline. We always knew she had it in her." He put his hand on my shoulder in front of the writer and arranged his face into pride. I didn't take his hand off my shoulder. Not yet. He steered me away from the writer toward the edge of the room, my mother falling in beside us, Preston appearing on the other side like he had been standing there the whole time. Caroline trailed, glass in hand. My father's voice dropped to the register he used for clients. "Let's be smart about this," he said. "Settle the matter quietly, for the name. There's no reason any of this has to become a story tonight." "What name?" I said. "Ours," he said, like it was obvious. "The Conrad name. You're a Conrad, Pauline, whatever's happened." Preston spoke for the first time. One line, smooth, rehearsed. "We're prepared to be generous on the structure. There's a number that makes everyone whole." My mother leaned in close, her hand light on my arm, her voice for me alone. "Don't make a scene tonight, sweetheart," she said. "Not in front of all these people, for all of us." She smelled the way she'd always smelled, and for 1 second I was 19 again with a tray of glasses. Then it passed. I looked at Preston, the man who had spent 3 hours trying to turn me into a thief. "I'm sure there is," I said. "Of course," I told my father. "Let's talk about the name." Caroline must have thought it was already won. She turned to a small knot of guests near us, people I sold wine to, people who knew the valley, and she gave them a little smile. "She got lucky," Caroline said. "Some old vines nobody else wanted." One of the guests, the sommelier who'd driven up that first year, looked at Caroline a second too long. "Nobody wanted them," she said evenly, "because nobody else knew how to farm them." Then she turned back to her glass. Caroline's smile flickered and didn't fully come back. My father moved off into the crowd, shaking hands, naming my grandfather to anyone who'd listen, planting the 4-generation story one guest at a time. He worked the room the way he worked a jury. A distributor I'd sold to for years stood listening to him, polite, glancing at me across the floor with a question on his face. For 1 second, standing there with my father's hand still warm on my shoulder and the whole room waiting for a toast, I thought about doing what Nora had first offered. Quiet. Clean. Let them keep the lie and walk away. Then I felt the shape of the old pruning knife in my jacket pocket, the bone handle I'd started carrying the way he had, and I heard the letter in my head. Let the ground answer. I caught Nora's eye across the room, near the stage. I nodded. Then I walked up onto the small stage, and I picked up the microphone, and I asked the room for a minute of their time. The barrel room went quiet. Behind me, the screen woke up, dark and waiting. Before the toast, I said, "My family would like to talk about a family matter. So let's." I looked at my father. I held out the microphone toward him, an invitation, in front of 200 people and 2 writers with their phones now coming up. "Dad," I said, "tell the room about the estate, and about the matter that's still unresolved." He should have walked away. He was too sure of himself to walk away. He took the floor like he had taken 1,000 depositions. He told the room the vineyard was the Conrad family legacy. He told them his family had farmed it for 4 generations. He told them there was an ongoing family matter being handled with discretion and care. And then, because he could not help himself, because he had spent 10 years building this lie and wanted to lay the last brick in public, he said it. My father, he told the room, was not entirely himself at the end. These decisions late in his life were not the decisions of the man I knew. The words left his mouth, in front of everyone, on the record. It was not over. It was just beginning. I let the silence sit for 1 second. Then I started, calm, the way Nora and I had practiced. My grandfather placed this vineyard into an irrevocable trust, I said. Lawfully, with independent counsel, with a doctor's letter on file, while he was alive and well. I held up the first document. The clause. I read the operative line out loud, slowly, so the writers could get it down. A few people near the front leaned in. The room had gone the kind of quiet where you can hear glasses being set on tables. A grower near the center folded his arms and turned to watch my father, waiting to see what a man says to a document like that. My father didn't blink. He'd been here before. That instrument was challenged, he said to the room, the picture of patience. The matter is unresolved. It was challenged, I agreed. Let's talk about who challenged it. I held up the next pages. I told the room the plaintiffs by name, Charles and Adele Conrad. I told them the attorney of record, the architect of every motion, every delay, Preston Vance. I let the room find Preston near the door, and then find Caroline beside him, the glass in her hand. I watched the math happen on 200 faces. A murmur moved through the barrels and didn't stop. It went to trial, I said. The court found my grandfather competent and the transfer valid. They appealed. They lost. They filed again. For years. Not to win. To wear me down until I'd sell. The distributor who'd been listening to my father's 4 generations story set down his glass and took a small step away from him. The way you step back from something you've just realized is wet paint. I let that breathe. They called this place a dirt farm for 10 years, I said. This summer, a group offered north of $40 million for it. That's the month my family remembered they had a granddaughter. My father's jaw tightened. For the first time all night, he had no story ready. Across the room, the old grower with the root hands had gone very still, watching the family the way you watch a coyote that's wandered into the open. I had only ever called him my father or dad. I changed it once, and only once, right then. Charles Conrad, attorney at law, I said, and I lifted the last page. Let me read you something you wrote. I read the email. His own words, sent to a broker named Whitlock years ago, before the trial. I read the part where he asked what the appreciated dirt would fetch on the open market. Once we clear the granddaughter. The room did not make a sound. A waiter stopped where he stood with a tray of glasses and did not move. One of the writers looked up from his phone at my father, then back down, typing faster. Near the center table, the young winemaker had gone pale. That's the unresolved matter, I said. Now I'd like you to hear from the one person everyone here keeps talking about. I nodded to Nora, the screen lit. And my grandfather was in the room. His voice came through the speakers, plain and unhurried, naming the date, naming himself, saying he was of sound mind, saying, "Ask my doctor." 200 people stood among his barrels and listened to a dead man lay his fence posts, one at a time. Heads turned to the screen. The writers stopped writing and just watched. Near the front, a woman put her hand over her mouth. Earl, off to the side, looked at the floor. He'd known that voice longer than I had. The whole room held still and let an old farmer speak. I played them the line, the one that mattered. "This land goes to the one who worked it," my grandfather said, filling the room, his hands folded and steady on the kitchen table. "Not to the ones who were waiting for me to be gone." I stopped it there. The silence after was a different kind of silence. Heavier. My mother had gone the color of that tablecloth from 10 years ago. My father stood very still, and I could see, finally, that he had nothing. No motion to file, no room to read, nothing in his hands at all. And then they did what my grandfather knew they would do. They couldn't hold it. Caroline cracked first. In front of the writers, in front of the buyers, she hissed it at me across the quiet. "He was senile, and you took advantage of him." Nobody moved. The voice of a clearly lucid man was still warm in the air above the barrels. Somewhere near the back, someone exhaled in plain disbelief. The young winemaker looked at Caroline like she'd finally seen the whole shape of the thing, then looked away. My father turned on her, sharp, the lawyer in him unable to stand a witness blowing up the case, and what came out of him was the truest thing he'd said all night. "That land is worth $40 million, he snapped loud, "and she let it sit there growing weeds while we—" He stopped. He heard himself. 200 people had heard him too. The dirt farm he'd just called the Conrad family legacy, the place he'd mourned with one breath, he'd priced with the next. A writer was typing now. Fast. Head down. My mother took his arm. Preston was already moving toward the door, the way a lawyer leaves a room that is turned against his client. A cluster of guests near the exit didn't part for him, and he had to go around them. Caroline set her glass down hard on a barrel head, the wine she had carried all night and never tasted, and followed them out. My father went last. He stopped at the door and looked back at the room. Not at me. At the room. Like he was waiting for someone to take his side. Nobody did. I didn't chase them. I didn't raise my voice once. When the door closed behind them, the barrel room let out a breath. The old grower with the root hands started it. He brought his hands together, slow and heavy. Then the rest of the room joined him, low and steady, building, like wind coming up through old vines at night. If you've ever been treated like you only mattered once you were worth something, you already understand the rest. Tell me about the moment you stopped waiting for them to choose you. I stepped back to the microphone. I waited for the room to settle. "Now," I said, "the toast." The follow-on motion was dismissed a few weeks later. Nora called me from the courthouse steps to tell me, and for once her steady voice wasn't steady. The court was not gentle about it. There were sanctions, and an order that my family cover a share of what their years of filings had cost me. Money was never the point, on either side, but it ended the way my grandfather said it would. With the truth, which had not gotten tired. A writer who'd been in the room that night told the story straight. The heritage vines, the trust, the recording, the old man's voice. People started calling folly a comeback. It wasn't a comeback. The vines had been doing their work the whole time. The world just finally looked up. The reserve sold out in a weekend. That mattered less than the calls that came after, growers and young winemakers asking how to farm old vines the old way, how to dry farm a hillside everyone had told them to tear out. I answered everyone. That was the part he would have cared about, not the score. The next set of hands. My parents tried once more. A text, weeks after. As a family, it began. I read the first 3 words and put the phone down. I didn't answer it, then or since. I turned off the notification for the number and the house in town went quiet in my hand. the way it should have gone quiet years ago. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt the specific lightness of setting down something I'd carried so long I had stopped noticing its weight. People ask if I cut them off out of anger. I didn't. I closed the door because they only came to it when I was worth something, and a person who only loves you when you're worth something doesn't love you. They appraise you. I had grown up on a wall, waiting to fill an empty space. I don't wait anymore. I went out to the old block before dawn the morning after the gala, the way my grandfather used to. I wore his canvas coat, the color of dust, and the bone-handled knife was in the back pocket where it always lived. The vines his own father planted in 1936 stood in the gray light like fists coming out of the ground, still keeping. I poured a glass of the reserve out at the roots of the oldest one. The ground keeps its own books. It had kept mine.